there! So I have officially been living in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for 3 years. Here's how that's going. I make a lot of videos talking about things that have happened in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. But one thing I don't talk a lot about is what daily life is like in this part of the country. Partly, that's because I don't think my daily life is all that interesting. Like, I'm not weaving around moose on my way to the grocery store or wrestling bears to get the stuff out of my mailbox. So that's part of it. But the other part is that the UP is a region. And like any region, life is going to look different depending on where exactly you live. And overall, I don't think I'm really a representative sample. Still, I did a video about my first year living in the UP, and I thought it would be fun to circle back after a couple of years. So I turned to social media and asked some of you what questions you had about life here. And turns out you had questions. So thank you. Now, one thing I will say is that some of these questions were so good and so interesting, but also have answers that are beyond the scope of this video. So thank you for those, and do know I have filed them away for future consideration. Here are some questions I do have answers to, though. Again, I will remind you that I am not the universal authority on all things UP, but that said, let's jump in. Okay, first question. Does it feel remote and cut off, or does that bring everyone local closer together? So, for folks who have not visited the UP, here's what we're dealing with. The Upper Peninsula is mostly forest. By area, it's about 1/3 the state of Michigan, but only 3% of the population lives up here. And of that little group, 60% of those people live in one of only 4 counties. So if you're driving from one bigger population center to the next, you might be driving through the forest for 1 or 2 or 3 hours. It's very different from like Metro Detroit, where all of the cities are linked together by smaller suburbs. So does it feel remote? For me, I'm like intellectually aware that this is the most remote place I've ever lived, but it's not something that I think about very often. So for context, I moved here from Ann Arbor, which is a moderately sized city pretty close to Detroit with lots of amazing options for food and museums and sports and all that good stuff. So when I came up here, I think I just immediately accepted that my life was going to look different. Like if you want to fly somewhere in the UP, I often joke that you should flip a coin to see if your plane is going to be on time. Or if there's a concert you really want to go to, you're probably going to Wisconsin or Detroit. Or my personal favorite, if there's something specific, let's say you need to get from Home Depot, like not Lowe's, not Ace Hardware, just Home Depot, you are going to either shop online or you're going to pack up the car and drive to Iron Mountain, because a lot of specific big box stores are not in every city up here. Now, that said, I do live in one of the more populated parts of the UP, so it's not like I'm going on a big excursion to get fresh produce or coffee or anything like that. So it certainly doesn't feel like I live in the middle of nowhere. I have definitely seen a sense of pride among the people who live here, though, and the sense of community is often extremely strong. And to specifically answer Josh's question, and also, hi Josh, I do miss the relative abundance of cultural stuff down south. My life is smaller in a lot of ways than it was when I lived in Ann Arbor, which overall in many ways is great, but I do miss the option to eat almost any kind of food and also the easy access to places like the Detroit Institute of Arts. That was a particularly long answer because I wanted to give you sort of a lay of the land of what things are generally like up here. So that said, we've got all these forests. What is the largest industry for jobs? What are people doing up here? According to a report from 2020, most jobs up here are in fields like transportation and utilities, education and health, hospitality, and manufacturing, which makes sense and generally tracks with what I've seen around me, given that a lot of those things are essential services, and also that the universities up here are especially big employers. One big difference up here is that there are fewer jobs in the sort of broad professional and business services category, and also there are generally just fewer jobs up here. So even though college students might come from all over to go to schools like Northern Michigan University or Michigan Tech, a lot of them have to leave after graduation to go find a job in their field. So maybe because of that, or partly because of that, the population in the UP does tend to skew older than the state on average. Okay, this is a broad question about cost of living, healthcare. How do lifelong Upers respond to new folks moving in? I will get to that last question at the end of this video because I think that one is particularly interesting. But when it comes to things like cost of living and utilities and healthcare and all that stuff, it's really going to depend on where exactly you live. Like I said, the UP is a region. My understanding is that housing tends to run cheaper than what I was used to seeing down in Ann Arbor, but the price of things like groceries can vary. And that's true of the overall shopping experience as well. Like Marquette has more big box stores than Houghton, which has more big box stores than Ontonagon, etc. So that's the big picture. You've got relatively small pockets of people scattered among a lot of forest with a population that is overall a bit older and also less diverse than Michigan on average. For me, like I mentioned, I just expected life was going to look different when I moved, so I've been able to take a lot of this in stride. Although I do also recognize I'm in the majority on a lot of demographics, which I'm sure has certainly helped. Although, hobby-wise, I am not into hunting or fishing yet. And still, I've managed to find many good things to do. Now, these things don't necessarily make the UP like that different from a lot of other small towns across the United States, but one thing we do have here that a lot of the US doesn't is obscene amounts of snow, which I also got a lot of questions about. The first question was actually, how are you doing without snow? Which I'm so happy we finally got some. I asked these questions in early January, and it's been about 2.5 weeks since then, and I'm relieved that we finally got some snowstorms that make winter feel normal around here. On average, winter in the Upper Peninsula can be very intense. Most places don't get the sort of like bone-chilling cold that you'll find on the plains, but the average snowfall per year can be anywhere from about 60 to more than 300 inches of snow. And I live in a place that is on the higher end of that spectrum. What's it like up here in the snow globe? I really liked how this question was phrased. They asked, would love to know how you keep your spirits up through the long, cold winter. So for me, winter has really been about making the most of it. And I am a glass half full person kind of naturally, which I think also helps. But on a more practical note, I've found things big and small that are unique to winter that I can get excited about. On the small side, it's stuff like I got new snow pants this year for the first time in forever, and I'm really excited about getting to wear those. But on the bigger end, I'm also part of a club that only does certain things in the winter. And I also tend to spend more time doing arts and crafts type hobbies, which I find really satisfying. I really don't think about winter as being insufferably cold and dark and endless. I think of it as a unique and uniquely cozy time of year to get to do stuff that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. I think the other thing is that winter is just so intensely beautiful up here, and it's hard for me to be grumpy and sad when there's this pristine blanket of snow on everything and the pine trees look all pretty. The thing about living in a snow globe is that you don't get the phenomenon you get in Metro Detroit where it snows a little bit and then just turns to gray slush between snowfalls. Here, for the most part, when the snow falls, it stays, so it's just kind of magical. I also got a great question about seasonal affective disorder that I couldn't find a good answer to. So if you have some data, let me know. But my best guess is that if someone deals with seasonal affective disorder, that will probably be true regardless of where they live in Michigan. Again, that's just a guess, but it's based on the fact that the amount of sunlight we get in the UP is not terribly different from a place like Detroit. Okay, last question. How do lifelong Upers respond to new folks moving in? Okay, I'm gonna start by saying that online, I have definitely seen some anti-tourist or don't move to the UP, we already have enough people attitudes. That is not something I was aware of before I moved here, so it's not something I was looking for, but that's not an experience I've had in person. I think I've just learned that if you walk into a small town bar and people turn around to look at you, it's probably because they assume they know you and like your nearest 3 generations of ancestors. Like my husband actually remarked recently when we were out to eat that if we're in a relatively empty restaurant and somebody walks in, he will now take a glance over to see if he knows them. And we've only been here for 3 years. Now, I do recognize that some of this could be the Midwestern tendency to be very polite, and some of it could also be the circles that I run in. A lot of my friends also were not born and raised here. But my hope is that if someone respected this place and recognized that the way of life here might not look the same as it did wherever they're from, my hope is that things would work out for them. So, end of year 3. How's it going? Well, to reflect on the things I reflected on at the end of year 1, there's still flies, still don't like those. I do still like winter, and I do still think it's magical. But there are also a lot of things I'm just used to now. Like, it's weird for me if I can hear road noise when I'm trying to fall asleep. And I frequently forget that it's not normal for people to have notifications sent to their phone whenever the northern lights are going to be out. I also find the number of billboards on highways downstate to be a little bit screamy. And the last time I tried to order delivery in Metro Detroit on like DoorDash, I was kind of overwhelmed at the number of options. So it's safe to say I've settled in. I've found some great spots, made some great friends, get to do a really cool thing for work, and man, I'm gonna be real sad if I ever have to leave this place. And of course, 5-10 years from now, I will look forward to watching this video and realizing how little I knew. Thank you so much to everyone who sent in questions, and if you have a question I did not answer, please feel free to leave it in the comments. At least for the next few days, I will try and answer all of the questions that I am able to answer. And of course, for now, thank you for being here. Even in a sort of unusual Q&A video like this, I hope you learned something that makes you think about the world just a little differently. And I'll see you soon.